straight out of the hive. It's touched no machinery and it is ready for the table. However, the bees are a bit robby at the moment, so we're going to be covering up the honey jars like this. Oh wow, that's actually got some Melaleuca in it already, which is the paper bark. Wasn't expecting that, but there it is. The paper bark has started to flower already. It flowers all through the winter here with the rain. It's called the rain tree by the indigenous folks here because a bit of rain happens, then it blooms, and then 3 days later the flowers just wither away to brown. The rain comes and it blooms again. So it's the rain tree, and it produces quite a lot of honey for us through the winter in dribs and drabs. So as far as the European honeybee, which is the bees that humans have dragged all around the world with them wherever they go, as far as they're concerned, there isn't a winter here, because here we are in our autumn and there's honey coming in and the bees are buzzing, and the same happens all through our winter. Okay, so I'm going to keep answering your questions as we go, and I'm going to cover up these. So beginner beekeeping today, if you've got questions, put it in the comments below and we'll get to answering those. Any questions coming in, Trace?
Yeah, great questions coming in. This is from Busy Lizzie asking, how often do you empty the honey from the beehive?
So you can empty it whenever you see full honey. Now if you have a look in the side window, we could see capped honey beneath their feet here. So it was really obvious that it was time to harvest the honey or empty the honey, as you say. And that's a good thing to empty some honey out when it's full, because it makes space in the hive for the bees to then get busy and move some honey up from down below, making more space for the queen to lay eggs, which is an important thing, especially in the springtime. So in springtime, harvest a lot of honey, make space in the hive, and your hive will be less likely to swarm, which is their natural thing they do when half of them take off and form a new colony somewhere. That's their natural divide. But if you don't want them to do that, because you don't want to lose half your bees, then harvest your honey in the springtime, make a bit of space in the brood box, and even get down there and cut out some of the honeycomb from the edges, move those frames into the middle and make some space. But getting back to your question, in this area I would bank on the average of harvesting all of these frames about twice in the season. So you would get 7 of these jars for the first time you harvested them all, and then another 7. So you get 14 of these jars from this hive in the season. Now some people will harvest a lot more, some a lot less, but that's probably our average around here. If you're really onto it, in springtime you can harvest a lot more, because you can see it fill up, harvest it, see it fill up, harvest it, and store a lot of honey when the flowers are really dripping to the ground with nectar.
Yum. Logan's wondering, how do you know the moisture content is right for your harvest?
So what you want to see is capping on the honey. So have a look here, and you see there's like a wax sheet that the bees put over the top of the honeycomb cells when the moisture content is low enough. Now they're doing that because they know it will keep. So they're choosing to put the wax capping on. It's like the lid on a preserving jar, because they know the moisture content is low enough for it to keep for a long time inside the hive should they need it later. And that means it'll keep for a long time in our jars on the shelf as well. So that's the time to do it. Now some bees will get a bit lazy and they won't get the moisture content low enough and it will be a bit runny in the jar. That just means it might not keep as long. But if the moisture content is nice and low, when the honey cools down, because it's warm coming out of the hive, but when it cools down and it's nice and thick and looks like honey, if you keep the lid on that jar, it should last almost indefinitely. It will go crystallized, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's changed form and it's still enjoyable to eat. In fact, my children love that, what they call crispy honey, the candied honey. In the Egyptian tombs, they've found honey in clay pots that's 3,000 years old and still good. So when the moisture content is low enough, it'll keep. But don't worry if you've harvested honey a bit early, perhaps that you've got some quite liquid honey, just enjoy that. It won't last as long. Keep it in the fridge, and if anything like my family, it'll be eaten up quick enough anyway.
Great, this is a great question, I thought. Well, honey, is there a colour that would be of a concern for the health of the bees or the honey if it came out of the flowhive? So a colour of the honey.
Well, a colour. Not really. We have heard some pretty weird things in the world, like green honey and blue honey coming in, but that was tracked back to an M&M factory that was putting some waste out the back, and the bees were collecting their sugary food colouring sweet liquid from out the back of the factory, bringing that back to the hive, and that's what gave the beekeepers funny coloured honey. But generally there isn't a colour that causes any concern. Around here it ranges from a really almost black honey that you cannot see through, right to your typical auburn honey colours, right through to a really light yellow. So all of them are great. Every now and then you get a flavour that you haven't tasted before, which is a bit strong or a bit strange, but mostly the honey flavours are beautiful. And I actually really enjoy it when the honey flavours are extreme as well, because it gives you that jar of honey you can put on the table and say, all right, tell me which one of these jars tastes like possum piss. And it just creates this beautiful tasting experience where people that aren't used to tasting honey just think of honey as a single flavour, because that's what the supermarkets have done. They've homogenised honey, whereas when it's raw natural honey straight out of your hive, you have the opportunity to separate the flavours, especially with the flowhive, and be able to show off all the different types and colours of honey. And there's as many different flavours of honey as there are flowers producing nectar in the world. So your mix and your flavours from your area will be probably unique to your area, and that's one of the beautiful things about keeping bees.
Yeah. Hey, and we're back on Facebook, so welcome everyone back on Facebook. So Scott's got a question coming in there. Just wondering, should the hive always be tilted forward all the time, even if you're not going to harvest the honey?
Great question. I always like to tilt it back towards the honey harvesting angle. That means the flow frames all work correctly. So I'll just give you a little example. Where can I show you that? Here. So yes, here, okay. So you can see down here there's a little bit of honey build up in this particular one, and sometimes that happens, the bees don't connect the parts well, or perhaps you've finished the harvest early and there's a bit of build up there and the bees have blocked up what we call the leak back point. So in here there's a leak back point. See that little gap that looks like we messed up our manufacturing? That's on purpose, and that is what allows any remaining honey to drip back into the hive. We put little ridges on here, and that's to make a little bit of space for the honey to drain back. And what you'll see is the bees' tongues. In fact, if you zoom in, you'll see them there right now. Bees' tongues actually licking up into that channel. And that means they'll clean out that area. Now, if you tilt the hive forward, this won't work, and you'll get a whole lot of honey building up at the other end, which you can't do anything about. And when you go to harvest, you might then tilt the hive back and all this old fermented honey comes gushing out, which is not what you want. So I recommend tilting the hive back on the 3-degree angle as we've designed all the time. And then what you need to do is sort out the water issues, and we've done that by putting a screen bottom board and a sloped landing board. So any water that might go in the front from driving rain mostly goes out again, but some of it might end up in there, goes through the screen bottom board and into the tray at the bottom, and that way it's not actually pooling in your hive. If you're using a different type of bottom board, like a flat conventional bottom board, then you may need to drill some holes at the back so any water that collects in there will just fall straight out, and that way you can remain with your hive on the 3-degree backwards slope. Now we've put levels in here to give you the correct slope, so the level bubble should be in the middle when it's time to harvest. So this one, I can see the level bubbles at the front legs have sunk into the garden. We actually need to screw out the front legs and lift it a little before we go to harvest next time. Great question.
Yeah, great question. Some great questions coming in. This is one from someone in Northern California. Just wondering, so after you purchase the flowhive and you've got it already, do you then have to purchase the bees to get started, or will they just fly in?
Yes, you want to get your bees from the local area. The easiest thing to do is buy what's called a nucleus, which is a going little mini hive you can pick up from a bee breeder, and you take that home, situate it where you want your flowhive, and it could stay like that for weeks or months if you like. And when you've got all your equipment ready, you've got it painted, and it's a nice warm sunny day, you can then get in your bee suit, get out your smoker, transfer those bees into your brood box, which is the bottom box here, look after them, and they'll grow. When they've drawn out all of the frames in here, they're using all of the frames, then it's time to put your super on top, which in our case is the flow super. The invention is in here that allows you to harvest honey in this easy, gentle way.
Great, so that might be a good time. We get a few, and there's a few questions coming in. So when you go to take the honey out of the hive, people get a bit confused, I think, and think it's killing all the babies and all the bees. Can you explain kind of what you've done about this and how it that's not really what happens?
Absolutely, look at that, this jar's filling up nicely. I pegged this one as the winner, but the centre one has won the race here with a almost full jar already, and this one is not far behind. Look at that, gorgeous, different colours of honey. We've covered them up because there is a bit of a robbing mood in the apiary today. And look at that, gorgeous though, excellent. I'm actually seeing a bee that got in there earlier, so I'm going to just fish that out. Bees will be fine in honey for a while. You can just pop that straight back on the landing board, and the other bees will clean that up, and there we go, job done. So getting back to your questions.
Yeah, the one about like when you're taking honey out of the hive of the super, is it ruining the hive and killing the bees and the babies and the brood? And
okay, we put a lot of effort into that and a whole patent about it. So first of all, we have the brood box down here where the queen is doing her things. It's conventional wooden frames. The bees are building their natural wax, doing their completely natural thing down below. We like to promote that you don't even put any plastic or wax foundation in there. You just let the bees do it, because we don't actually need to put wax and wire or plastic foundation in there. We don't need the strength you might need to use in a centrifuge. So we can then take advantage of being able to keep it perfectly natural down the bottom. Then we have an excluder in place, which means the queen is stuck down in the bottom box. You can't move up and lay eggs in your honey super. And that means you won't have brood or larvae or cocooned bees inside your flow frames, which means that when you turn the key, there's only honey in there ready to flow out. Now, you could get into a situation where one of the frames you harvested, the cells weren't full of honey and there were some bees down the cells. So what we've done about that is we've put space in between the parts. So when the parts move, there's enough space usually for the bee to just crawl out, but at worst it could be stuck in a bit of its wax, because the bees have joined the flow frame parts together with their wax like this. The parts have moved and come back again, so you've just got some broken wax in here and perhaps a bee in one of these cells, but at no stage are these parts meeting and catching a bee's leg or a wing or anything like that. So it's really important to us that the bees are at least disturbed as possible, and I can happily say that a lot less bees are hurt than in conventional harvesting with the flowhive.
Great. Sita, we just had, when we were talking about the coloured honey, there's someone's made a comment that they know of a woman in Victoria who lives in a rural area who has green honey for a short period of time.
Oh,
most years. Green honey.
I'd love to see the green honey.
I know.
I've never seen green honey, so if anyone could send me a jar, that would be awesome.
Nice. And then same question from the same person saying they've got some really thick honey in their flowhive frames that won't drain out. Have you got any suggestions of how to get that honey out of the flow frames?
Ah, okay. There is a few types of honey in the world that have what's called a thixotropic property, which means that the honey sets like jelly in the frames. And the New Zealand Manuka is one of those, and the Australian Polygalifolia, Leptospermum polygalifolia, is another one. And in Europe there's some heather honeys. So the ones around here and in New Zealand that show that jelly-like property are the medicinal ones, and it's a pain to get them out of flow frames or conventional frames. So because it sets in the frames, it's just hard to get out. Now what we find, if it's a 50-50 mix of say Manuka and something else that's more liquid, the honey will come out in globules, and you'll enjoy watching these jelly-like globules coming out into your jar. But if it's 100%, then it will set in there like jelly, and as you say, it won't come out. So you've got a few options. You can take the frame out and try manual extraction just as you would with conventional frames, or you can do nothing about it. The attempt to harvest it will likely trigger the bees to get in there, rip that honey out, and hopefully next time they replace it with liquid honey that's easy for you to harvest.
Great. Now Matthew wants to move a hive from the side of the house to the back garden because they've got some work to start. What's the best way to move the hive? So I don't know how far, but it might be good to talk about, because I had someone else saying they had to move their hive yesterday down a hill 4 metres, and I'd sent them a link to a video, but maybe we could talk about that. See, it's like a long way and a smaller distance as well.
Okay, so if you're moving a hive a short distance, there is a couple of methods. So when I say short, I mean across your yard or less than say 6 miles or 4 kilometers. So if you're moving it in that short distance, the bees have GPS like accuracy. They will take in landmarks and they will know where home is. So if you picked up this hive and moved it over there, all the forager bees would come back to this spot going, where's my hive, where's my hive? So there's a couple of tricks you can do. One is you can take it more than 4 miles or 6 kilometers away, keep it there for a month till all the forager bees have turned over, and then bring it back to your new location. Now that means you won't get a whole lot of bees returning to here, apart from a handful that slept out the night on the morning you moved your hive. Okay, but that's a lot of effort. So what I tend to do is use a reorientation technique where I'll pick up this hive, move it to the other side of the yard, and what I'll do is put some leafy branch material like this right in front of the entrance, or get an old t-shirt and tape it around the hive, leaving just enough room for the bees to get out. The enthusiastic bees will race out of the hive, they'll hit this obstacle and go, something's moved, something's changed, and they will do a reorientation flight, take in new landmarks, and 95% of your forager bees will return to the new location with your branch in front of the hive. However, you'll still get that 5% returning to the old spot, so you can choose to do nothing about it, and if you've got more hives around, they'll find another hive to go into. Or you can put a cardboard box there or something, just give them something to land on, collect them and ferry them across to your hive on the other side of your yard. If you keep doing that a bunch of times, you'll end up with all your lost forager bees back at your new location without having to do the big 6 kilometer move. Another way is to just slowly move it. If you move it less than 2 meters at a time, which is about that far, then you will be able to slowly creep it across your yard. So if it's a really short distance, you can put your hive on, say, a trolley, and then 1 or 2 times a day you can just move it a couple of meters and the forager bees will slowly follow. And what you'll find is every step you've moved, you'll see bees coming and buzzing around the old location and going, oh, that's right, it's over here. Buzzing around that new spot, oh, that's right, it's over here. And you get this beautiful trail of every dot you've moved the hive, and slowly you'll get the bees to move across your yard. So that's another good way to move your hive a short distance. We've got videos showing you how to do all of these things on the beekeeper.org, which is an online course we put together with experts from all over the world. Stuart and myself are on there with many other experts around the world, covering topics that we can't cover here simply because we don't have snow and we don't have varroa mites yet, and so on. So there's a lot of topics in there. It's a great online course that gets rave reviews, made to take you from square one right through to even a deep scientific knowledge in beekeeping. It is a great fundraiser as well. So it's free to try, and we raise a lot of funds from there to create high quality ecosystems. So far we've planted 1.5 million trees all over the world, including locally here, to create high quality ecosystems for bees and everything else that needs forage and trees to survive, which habitat is key to sustainability on planet Earth. So have a look at the beekeeper.org if you really want some high quality training material. Any more questions?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's a pretty popular question at the moment with our customer support team from our US beekeepers. They can see shipping obviously of the flow hives at the moment is a bit delayed and not due till early May. Just wondering, how can people prepare their bees for their flow hive until it arrives? Tips would be great.
Okay, so if you want to order bees, then I would recommend ordering a nuke, which is a little mini hive that might have 4 or 5 frames in it, with a queen laying eggs, with pollen stores, with honey stores. It's a going little mini hive that you picked up from a bee breeder. You then situate it where you want to have your hive in the yard, and make sure that it's not getting too hot. Nukes can suffer on really hot days from meltdowns because they're often in just a little core flute box and they're getting too hot in there and the wax can actually melt. So put some kind of cover over the top of that. Doesn't matter what it is, even a piece of cardboard with a brick on top, something to give it a little bit of shade so that it doesn't get too hot while you wait to get your equipment painted up, get it ready to put your bees in. It can stay like that in a nuke box for weeks or months even, and when the time's right, you've got your equipment ready, get in your bee suit, get out your smoker, wear your gloves if you're new to beekeeping, and transfer the frames from your nuke box right into your flow hive. Put it in the same position you've had your nuke, and that way all the returning bees will know where to go, look after them, and they'll grow. And when they've used all your wooden frames in the bottom box, they've drawn out all their wax, which might be some months down the track, you're then ready to put your super on top, which is the flow super with our invention in it, ready to harvest honey in this easy way.
Great, thanks Cedar. Now Natasha, this is another one, the old story, ask 10 beekeepers and get 20 different answers. Natasha's in Adelaide and is a little bit confused about winter. Some are saying take the super off, some are saying leave it there. Natasha wants to leave it there and just wondering, is that okay?
So it's the old ask 2 beekeepers and get 3, 5 or 10 different answers. So like anything in beekeeping, there is often not a wrong or a right way. There is what works for you and your bees, and often what worked for somebody somewhere in the world was the right thing for them at the time. So ask around and then make up your own mind. I've been in Tasmania, the most southern part here in Australia, where you do get extreme long cold winters, one commercial operator said your bees will not survive if you don't have the larger size, the 10 frame Langstroths, and 3 boxes high. And I go around the corner, another commercial beekeeper says, no, I just keep it the 8 frame Langstroths, the smaller size, just a brood box and a super on top. They survive the winter fine. So you get all of these different varied answers. So if you want to, you can leave your flow super on, but the minimum I would suggest is taking the excluder out. So lift the top box off, take the excluder out. That way, if the bees are balled up like they do in long cold winters to keep warm, they can then move up into here to consume the remaining honey in the flow frames, and the queen might be left behind under the excluder. But if you've got the excluder, if you've taken out the excluder, she can move with the ball of bees, keep warm, and that way you'll have a queen come springtime. So make sure you take that excluder out if you're allowing the bees to eat the honey from the flow super over your cold, long winter. Come springtime, you'll need to either find the queen, put it down the bottom, or just shake all the bees off the flow frames down into the brood box, put your queen excluder back in place, put your flow super flow frames back in place, and away they go, knowing that the queen is in the right spot in the hive, laying her eggs down here in the brood box.
And Zeta, does the queen still get her honey if we take the honey from the hive, from the super?
Yes, so there's often a lot of honey stores down in the bottom box here. So if you take this off, there's honeycomb on the edges, which you can get in there and harvest some of, or perhaps you might just want to cut a nice round out of it for your cheese platter. So the edge ones are often honey and no brood. So it's nice to leave a lot of that down there for your queen, as you say, to be fed, but she's only one bee in amongst potentially 50,000 bees that need carbohydrates or honey to survive. So leaving honey, especially if you're unsure what the season might have ahead of you, then leave some honey for the bees. After all, it is their food, it is their carbohydrate to fuel them, keep them going, and also the carbohydrate that they can make wax from. So if you're unsure, leave honey for the bees, whether it be just a few of the frames up in the top box or some nice honey stores down below. That way the bees won't go hungry. If you find the bees have no honey stores at all, then you can feed them a sugar syrup by making a feeder under the roof of the hive with a mixture of water and sugar, and that way your bees won't starve over a long cold winter.
Nice. And can native bees go in a flow hive?
No, we have, well, it depends. If you're in Europe, yes, because this is the native European honeybee. But here we are in Australia with lots of different types of native bees. There's one that is a colony forming one called the sugar bag bee, and we have the oldest living culture of honey harvesting in the world here in Australia, up north, where they're still collecting from the sugar bag bees in the traditional ways by doing things like tying a hair or a little feather onto one of these little black fly-like bees, and they'll follow that bee back to its nest, and then they'll rip the hive apart, often destroying the colony, and get the sugar bag honey. So they have a completely different grape-like spiral structure, and while yes, I could put my mind to making a very intricate kind of DNA spiraled flow frame version for them, it's not really worth the bother because they don't produce much honey at all, and you're lucky to get a quarter of one of these jars a year out of one of those hives. So there's different ways to harvest them. You wouldn't make a flow hive for them, and their structure is completely different, so it won't work with these. The other native bees we've got are solitary bees, which only need just a hole in the mud or a hole in a piece of bamboo, like you see our little pollinator houses, and they are just looking for a place to lay a few eggs and raise a few young, so they don't have a colony, so they won't work in the flow hive either. There are some types of Apis mellifera in the world that do differ from these. So Apis mellifera is the European honeybee, but then we have Apis cerana, which is the Asian honeybee, which you can get to work in flow frames with a few tips and tricks. There's the Cape honeybee in South Africa, which does work in a flow hive. There's the Africanized bees, which do work in the flow hive, and a couple of other subspecies of Apis mellifera. So basically it's designed for the European honeybee or its very close similar variants.
Great, thanks. And I'll just, we've got someone who's just trying to log on to the beekeeper.org but is getting directed. Just don't forget to put that word "that" in front of the beekeeper.org and you should end up in the right spot. Okay, can you harvest wax from the flow hive?
You can harvest wax, you can harvest honeycomb. After all, it's a beehive. Bees love making wax and honeycomb, so all you've got to do is make some space for them to do so. So you could do that under the roof here by putting as soon as you take this cap out, actually the bees will move up into the roof, create an enormous amount of honeycomb up here for you to harvest comb, and you can keep the wax for making candles, etc. That's fun for a little bit, but then you decide that's a bit messy to do all the time, so you might like to quarantine them to a smaller area by putting, say, a glass Tupperware dish over the top of here. You can enjoy watching them make honeycomb in a more contained space. Other methods are adding, say, another box dedicated to honeycomb collection, or that could be above or below this. You could have a shallow box or you could have a deep box, anything you like. After all, bees just make comb when there is space to do so, and then you can have fun collecting your honeycomb and reusing the wax. Also down in the brood box, the frames on the edge often have no brood in it. You can take one of them out, which is what you need to do in the springtime anyway, and you can take some of that back to the kitchen, cut some nice rounds out of it to put on your cheese platters.
Nice. Now a couple of beekeepers are asking, how do you transfer your bees from a nuke to the flow hive, or if you've got a Langstroth flow hive, how do you do that and put them into the flow hive?
Okay, both options are easy. Same size frames. These are a Langstroth beehive, the most common type in the world, and we've added bells and whistles in our invention and called it a flow hive. But this size box, it's basically a Langstroth bee box down here, so you can simply grab the frames from a Langstroth hive or a nuke with the Langstroth frames in it, transfer them into your brood box, look after them, and they'll grow from there, and away you go. Sometimes, on rare occasions, you've got different size frames that are either shorter or taller, in which case you'll need to make some modifications in order to get them started in the brood box, or you could cut the brood sections out, rubber band them into the frames that come with our flow hive, and then they could fix up the comb and join it to the surrounding frame, and away they'll go with the correct size frames. But most bee breeders in the world will be using frames that perfectly suit the flow hive.
Cedar, does the hive need to be directly in the sun, or would shade be okay as well?
Oh, we have got an overflow here.
Ooh.
There is so much honey that it's actually just starting to overflow this jar here. These are like a 2.2 litre jar, and every now and then we will overflow it. So that's beautiful. Bumper harvest here in the centre of this hive. Switch the two jars over. This will be a little bit messy, but the remaining honey out of this one can go into this jar. They're a similar colour but probably slightly different flavours, but for the purposes of this exercise I'm going to switch them over. And what I might do is Let me see.
I'm going to grab your cloth seeder, so.
Thank you. Look at that.
Wow.
Oh, that is yum.
There we go.
That is messy.
I don't think I've ever seen it overflow like that.
What we might do is actually shut off this one and take this one away to clean up. We'll do that by putting this cap back in, or naughty bees. Okay, put that back in. We're going to move this one across. We're going to take this one away. We're going to put this one right under that jar there. And there we go, Sophie. There's a very full jar of honey for you.
Lunchtime.
Thank you. Now, as said, the bees are a little bit hungry and they've got into a little bit of a robbing mood here. So we won't harvest all of their honey. We'll leave the rest for the bees because we know they are a little bit hungry. And these ones that jumped in the jar earlier will be totally fine. They can survive in honey for hours and hours, so there's no issue there. But if you see that happening, just cover up your jars and make sure you don't get hundreds of bees coming for the honey behind the hive. There we go. Yum. One lucky last bee. Very good. Any more questions?
Yeah, newbie question, just about to get their new flow hive and they're about to move it to some land. Just wondering, how do they get the queen bee to start with?
Okay, so there's a few different ways to get started in beekeeping. And while you can order queen bees in the mail, you need more than a queen bee to start a colony. You need a whole lot of worker bees as well. So there's various different ways to get started, and the easiest way is to order what's called a nucleus, which is a going little mini hive that has a queen in there laying eggs, that has frames already drawn out with wax, pollen stores, honey stores, and brood in there, keeping that little hive going. You can then wait for a nice warm sunny day and transfer those frames into your brood box, look after them, and they'll grow. When they have built up and used all the frames in here, you can go ahead and put your flow super on top, look after them, and if there's a lot of flowers around and there's a lot of bees in your box, they'll start storing a lot of honey up the top here, and then it gets really exciting. There are other ways to get started. You can take a split from a friend by taking some of the frames out of their bottom box. If there's eggs on those frames, the bees will then raise a queen from those eggs, usually, and your hive can get started that way. Another way is catch a swarm. If you're near a whole lot of beehives in springtime, you'll likely see a swarm or two, and they'll be hanging from trees, and you can shake those bees into your brood box, take them home, look after them, and they'll grow from there. So there's a number of different ways to get started. Another is order a package of bees, which is basically an artificial swarm. You shake the bees off some frames, or a bee breeder's shaking the bees off some frames, sent them to you in the mail with a queen in a little cage. Now let's see if I've got one of these queen cages. Here we go. So the queen will come in a little cage like this with about 5 escort bees in there and a block of candy in the end so she can get fed in transit. You then put the package of bees, which might be 10,000 bees shaken out of another hive. It arrives on your doorstep, this buzzing box of bees. The postal service has wide eyes as they drop that on your doorstep. You then take it to where you want to situate your hive, shake those bees into your brood box, insert the queen, which is in a little cage with your package, in between some of the frames. A couple of days later, all the candy that's in the end here will be chewed away. The queen is released into the hive, and your bees will go to work building all of the comb that's needed to start for the queen to lay her eggs, and away your colony goes. So they're the different methods. There's one more which is called a bait hive. So it's unusual to start this way, but you could, if you're near a whole lot of other beehives in springtime, you could set up your flow hive just the brood box about 6 to 12 feet off the ground, you might like to put a little bit of lemongrass oil in there to help attract a swarm, and you might be lucky and the bees move right on in, and that's called a bait hive.
Oh, fantastic. And then of course the question that comes after that one is, then how do you know when to add your flow frames, your super box, once you've installed your nuke?
So if you're in a warm climate, it doesn't really matter adding your flow super on top early, but if you're in a place that's still getting cooler nights, then hold off. Wait till all of the frames are built out with wax and there's a lot of bees in the bottom box before you go ahead and add your flow super. The reason being is otherwise you just give them unnecessary extra space to keep warm. So it'll be a help for your bees if you hold off, wait till they're fully using all the frames in the box before adding your flow super. Now, if there's a long winter just around the corner, you might like to hold off on adding it till the spring comes, but any other time of year, once they're filled up all of these frames, then go ahead and add your flow super on top. When the bees have built up and you've got a good nectar flow, they will start storing honey in the flow frames.
Great. Mike wants to know, can you replace frames, and I'm not sure whether brood or flow frames, to make more room so the bees won't swarm, or will bees just swarm anyway?
So swarming is bees' natural way of dividing. So genetically there are more swarmy bees and less swarmy bees, and bee breeders will often breed for less swarmy activity because it's helpful for the beekeeper to have less swarm activity in the springtime. That way their colonies stay strong without half the bees taking off, and you don't have that issue with half the bees perhaps taking off and landing on the neighbour's washing line and so on. So if you're starting with bees from a bee breeder, you'll likely have less swarmy genetics. If you're starting by catching a swarm, then you're likely to have quite swarmy genetics. So the primary trigger for swarming is not enough room for the queen to lay her eggs. Now, what you can do about that is do your spring management, which is take off the top box if you've got one on there, get into the brood box, take away some of the honey from the edges. So you might just take out your frames. If you're using naturally drawn combs, it's quite easy. All you need to do is cut out the honeycomb from the edge, put the frame straight back in towards the center, same from the other side, and you've created some new empty space which the bees will fill in with wax really quickly, and the queen will have new fresh comb to lay eggs, which is helpful for your hive and limits that primary swarming trigger. Another great way, and this is my favourite way, is you take a split. So take half the frames out of the bottom and put them in a new hive, and that way you've started a new colony. If you don't want another one, somebody else surely will, and you'll be helping them get started in bees, and you've limited the primary swarm trigger of the parent colony by adding a lot of extra space here in the brood box. Great thing to do for your spring management.
Sita, how do you think a flow hive would work in the rainforest of Puerto Rico, where there is constant rain?
So there's all sorts of different climates here in Australia and successful flow hive beekeepers all over. So bees are incredibly resilient, and what you might like to do is get in touch with some beekeepers in your area, because you're going to need to get a colony off them anyway, and find out how the bees are going in your constant wet season. And if they're successfully keeping bees, then the flow hive will work great. So in some areas you might find there's the Asian honeybee but not the Apis mellifera, the European honeybee. But most places in the world there is the European honeybee, Apis mellifera, and it will do well in tropical conditions, subtropical conditions like here, in dry desert climates, in cold climates, in snow, right up to Alaska, all through Europe, down to Tasmania here in Australia. Basically, bees, Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, is so adaptable, it works anywhere in the world except for perhaps where there's no flowers like Antarctica.
Petrus wants to know, do you know if you can move hives in New South Wales yet? I guess asking in relation to the varroa mite.
Yes, keep an eye out when you're new to beekeeping. Make sure you do register with your governing body in New South Wales. It is the DPI, and that way you get updates from them saying if there's anything you need to abide by. So most of the restrictions are lifted now that varroa is on the loose and you can move colonies. However, there is still some restrictions in place, so make sure you read what they are. We can put some links in below, and make sure you are following any rules in place that might help stop the spread of mite. And usually it's a case of filling in a couple of forms, and as long as you're not moving from a varroa infected area that they're trying to control, then you can go ahead and do your hive moves here in New South Wales now.
Wait, a new beekeeper in South Florida, Bob, his question is asking, Cedar, will bees deposit pollen in the flow frames?
Unusually, so every now and then you see like a single cell or two of pollen in the flow frames. So it's nice that they don't, because as you can imagine, bee bread or pollen, a lot of pollen in the flow frames would impede the flow of honey down into the trough area. But I almost never see pollen stores in flow frames.
Cedar, how can you tell the difference between Manuka honey and regular honey?
So Manuka honey is a species of leptospermum from New Zealand. Originally came from Australia a long time ago, and it's naturalised, became a bit of a weed in New Zealand. Beekeepers hated it because it had this thixotropic property that gummed up all the hives. Then they realised it was medicinal, and it became a gold rush for the Manuka honey, and still is. And that Manuka is thick and jelly-like, so that's one of the ways you can tell if it's Manuka, is it's got a thixotropic jelly-like property. Here in Australia we have another one called Leptospermum polygullifolia, or jellybush it gets called, and you can see the globules of jelly coming out. There's a few different species that have thixotropic properties, and that's how you can tell that they're a Manuka species. But there are other species of leptospermums also highly medicinal, like Leptospermum whitei and a few others that are liquid. So that's the one I've been planting around the place here, because I'd prefer not to have too much jelly. While a little bit's fine, you can get up to 50% in your frames and it'll still come out. If you have 100% jelly, then it's very hard to harvest no matter what type of harvesting you're doing, whether it be flow frames or conventional honey frames.
Cedar, what's the maintenance or replacement or any cleaning protocols that you need to do throughout the life of the hive? Like the flow frames, do they need washing, and do you need to clean out the brood box?
Okay, so I've run over a couple of little things. It's amazingly not that, there's not a whole lot of cleaning you have to do, which is nice compared to a lot of farming. Like if you have a lot of animals, often there's a lot more tasks you need to do, but beehives, you can go away for months at a time and your bees are usually fine, and yeah, they're great like that. Now, flow frames themselves, if you keep them in the hive, they'll last a very long time. The bees will look after them. After about 5 years, you might want to take them out, clean them with a pressure washer to get a whole lot of the old wax off. As you can see, wax is starting to build up on these because they've been used for multiple seasons, and you start to lose this beautiful view you've had here. And you might want to blast that off with a pressure washer, or even better, a hot water pressure washer, or feed a cheap pressure washer from a hot water service to help blast off some of that old wax. Now that's, you know, down the track, perhaps 5 years in. General maintenance throughout a season, you might see some honey building up in these areas here. So what you can do about that is clean what's called the leak back point. Now, me just taking that cap out, cleaned it. It just unblocked a little bit of wax they'd used, so any remaining honey will drip back into the hive. So that's one thing you could do. if you've left it a long time and the honey's built up in there and it's gone fermented, then what you can simply do is get a thin cloth. This one's actually a little bit thick, but for the purpose of the exercise, I'll show you how to do it. You wet that cloth and you'll wind it around your flow key like this. And that will allow you just to insert it into here and give that a good clean out like that. And that way, if there's any build up there, you can, with a wet cloth, you can clean that, and look at that, beautiful. You've got a nice, clean trough area. In terms of maintenance on the hive, we have a tray down here we've been using to catch beetles recently, and you can clean that out depending on if you're using oil in there. It might be every couple of months you want to clean that out if you've been catching hive beetle with it. If you have been using detergent and water, it'll be cleaned out more regularly. So let's have a look. This one's got nothing in it at the moment. A little bit of water there from our recent rain that's come in the front. So maintenance will simply be tipping that out, or if we're using it for catching hive beetles, then what we'll do is put some cooking oil in there. You can see a few hive beetles running around. We've had quite a lot recently, so a good time to catch some of those beetles, lessen the load in your hive by putting some cooking oil in this tray. But I'm just going to empty that out. Now you could just hose that, give it a good clean, or you could say that's good enough and put it back in. So that's about it in terms of cleaning the flow frames or your tray down here. If you've used an oil on your hive, like this one is actually oiled, which we have stopped recommending, we tend to go for the decking products, but if you have used a timber oil, then you're going to have to re-oil it regularly, otherwise mildew will build up and it will feed off that oil and it won't look very good after a year or two. Whereas these coats here, like you see, it's a decking product and that lasts a lot longer. It's made to keep wood looking like wood outdoors. That's about it. That is, it's very low maintenance, I think, for the real amount of produce you can get from a beehive.
Great, Tina. And for people who buy the Australian, the araria, the hoop pine, which is like the one we're harvesting out of today, and some people of course love that looking like timber, is there any products they could use on that without having to paint it that you could recommend?
You can go ahead and experiment, but what we recommend is a good outdoor house paint. Have some fun with your artworks, and that will keep your araria looking good for the longest and give you a less maintenance requirement. We find that the cedar you can get away with using a decking product and it will last a long time, or the cedar you can even leave completely natural. Still recommend painting the roof, but you can leave it natural, let it go grey. Cedar wood's amazing like that. Araria, however, should be protected with an outdoor house paint like most woods if you want to keep them outdoors for the long term.
Right, Mike is wanting to know, can you keep a flow hive on an apartment balcony? Because will the bees find their way home?
Absolutely. So beekeeping is popular in the cities, it's popular in urban backyards. My sister kept bees in Berlin on a balcony for a long time, and she had 3 or 4 hives there on her balcony, and she was able to do farming even in that city urban environment. And that's what makes bees so special, is from a very small footprint like this you can do a real amount of farming and producing produce without having to have land. Now the bees forage on a wide area, and often in the cities there's a lot of things that people plant that extends the honey season, and you can often find city beekeepers boasting that they get more honey and more different varieties in a longer season than people do in the forested regions. So go ahead and keep bees in the city. Of course, check with any local laws that might be an issue, but in most places you can go ahead and keep bees. And the flow hive is a great choice because you don't have to go through the process of taking the hive apart when it comes time to harvest. So there'll be less pulling apart of the hive, and therefore less bees going everywhere when you're doing your harvest. They're just doing their thing, going in and out as usual. This is the frame we're harvesting from here, and the bees are still going about their business, flying in and out as they normally do. So harvesting with a flowhive is great in the city, on the rooftop or on balconies, because you don't need an extracting room, you don't need the big centrifuge, you don't need the hot knife, the buckets and all of those things. It's just here, harvesting from the hive to your jars. Thanks for all of your great questions. We've got time for one more.
Oh, beauty. Okay, Ryan's one. It was a bit like the question I asked you yesterday, Cedar. Ryan's got a nuke coming, but it's coming in medium frames. How do they transfer that to the flow with deep frames?
So medium frames are a small size, so it's unusual to get nukes in medium frames, but the frames are about this big. So there's a few options for you. One is you could just put them in and they'll draw some more comb underneath, hanging off the bottom bar. Now it might be a bit messy and you might need to clean it up a little bit, but over time you can cycle out those frames that you started with by inserting deep frames back into the center over time, and then as your medium frames get pushed out towards the edge, you can then wait till there's no brood in them, take them away and insert deep frames. You could do that, or you could cut the comb out, use rubber bands to hold them into your deep frames, which come with the flowhive, and the bees will connect extra wax to the surrounding, draw more out, and away you go with converting your medium frames to deeps.
Fantastic. Oh, you're going to go for another one, Seeds?
May as well.
Look, this is a question. Not sure what their name is, but they had a flow hive and the bees are just a bit slow to accept the flow frames. Any tips or tricks on helping the bees start putting honey into the flow frames?
Yes, so if you find your bees aren't doing a whole lot and you're getting impatient, then there's a few things you can do. However, the best recipe for getting your bees to harvest honey in the top box here, whether it be a flow frame or other, is a lot of bees in your box. So when you open the window, you've got lots of bees in here and like that, and you have a good nectar flow. So there's a lot of nectar in the flowers, the bees are able to go and collect that, and then they'll start storing. If either of those things are out, you don't have a strong enough colony or there's not enough nectar around, then they will not have excess to store in your flow frames. So you might need to exercise some patience. However, if you're getting impatient, what you could do is scrape some comb off the top of the frames in your brood box. If they are ready for the super, they would have built a bit of comb on top of the top bars. You can scrape that off with your hive tool, mash it into the flow frame surface, and you won't damage the flow frames. And what you'll be able to do is then watch through the window, then recycling that wax, joining up the parts in that area of the flow frames, and that'll get them started in that small area, but you still won't see any honey stores until there's a good nectar flow. So patience is one of the big ones. Thanks for all of your great questions. If you'd like to know something specific, then chime in, and if you've got answers to people's questions, then help answer them just by getting into the comments. It's great to see a community all over the world helping answer. We don't have all the answers here because we don't have, I guess, snow and all of the things that you might have in your country. So chime in and help answer. It's great to see people doing that. And if you would like to get a demonstration of something specific, then let us know what it is. We'd love to show you next time on